I didn't lose my temper when they cut into my land, and that's exactly why they ended up paying triple. See, I own about 80 acres out past a quiet stretch of county road most people don't even notice. Just woods, real woods. Not that decorative tree-lined stuff you see behind suburban fences. I'm talking oak thick enough to block out the sky, cedar that smells like memory, and a row of black walnut trees that took longer to grow than most careers last. That land isn't just mine on paper. It's my retirement plan, my fallback, my proof that patience actually pays off if you leave something alone long enough. Now, a few months back, a logging outfit rolled in next door, big operation, loud machines, trucks in and out all day like ants hauling sugar. And I didn't think much of it at first because, hey, it's their land. They can do what they want, right? Except one morning I walked my boundary line, just a routine thing I do every so often, and something fell off in a way I couldn't explain right away. Like when you walk into your house and a chair's been moved just an inch. Nothing obvious, but your gut goes, yeah, something's wrong here. I kept walking, slow at first, scanning the tree line. Then I saw it, a stump, fresh cut, clean as a surgical incision. Sap still bleeding like the tree, didn't even have time to understand what happened. I stood there a second, trying to rationalize it. Maybe I misremembered the boundary. Maybe that tree wasn't mine. But then I took 5 more steps, another stump, then another, and another. By the time I reached the far edge, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was counting, and that count turned my stomach cold. They hadn't just crossed over by accident. They carved straight through a section of my land like it was part of their contract, like my property line was just a suggestion painted in invisible ink. No call, no knock on the door, no, hey, we might be close to your line. Nothing, just gone, decades of growth erased in a couple afternoons. I went back to my house, pulled out the survey maps I had done years ago, the kind with coordinates down to inches, and then I grabbed my boots and walked it again, this time checking every marker. Bright orange stakes still exactly where I left them, steel pins driven deep enough that no machine accidentally nudges them out of place. The line was clear, unmistakable, not even a gray area if you tried to squint at it sideways. So I did what most people would do. I drove over there. Their site office was just a temporary trailer, mud tracks everywhere, chains clanking, engines idling, and inside there's this foreman sitting back like he owned the air in the room, boots up on a folding table, coffee in hand, like nothing outside those walls mattered. I didn't come in yelling, didn't slam the door, just stood there and asked him one simple question, calm as you like. Did your crew cut timber past the marked boundary line? He barely looked at me. I mean barely, like I was a notification he could swipe away, and he goes, if it was in the way, we took it. In the way? I remember that phrase hitting me harder than anything else, because to him those trees weren't decades of growth. They weren't value. They weren't mine, they were just obstacles. And right there, I made a decision. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't threaten him, nothing dramatic. I just nodded, turned around, and walked out. Because in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't going to be settled with words. That night, I got to work. I walked every inch of that cut line again. But this time I documented everything, photos from multiple angles, GPS coordinates stamped on each location. Even sent a drone up to capture aerial footage showing exactly where their clearing sliced into my property, a perfect visual line where my forest stopped being mine because someone else decided it wasn't. Then I sat down at my table, and I made a list. Not a rough estimate, not a guess, a detailed, itemized inventory. Every tree they took, species by species, diameter measured from the stumps, height estimated from surrounding growth patterns. And then I calculated board footage, current market rates. And let me tell you something, black walnut alone isn't cheap. A straight, mature walnut tree can fetch thousands, not hundreds thousands. By the time I finished that list, it wasn't just a number anymore. It was a statement. The next morning, I sent them an invoice. Professional, clean, itemized down to the last inch of timber, backed with photos, coordinates, and valuation data that could hold up in any room with fluorescent lights and serious faces. And you know what they did? They laughed. Not metaphorically, not dismissive chuckle. I mean actually laughed, like I had just told them a joke, said it was an honest mistake, said I was overreacting, said trees grow back. Yeah, trees grow back. Give it about 40 years, and we'll circle back to this conversation, right? That's when I realized they thought I was the kind of guy who'd just let it go. And that's where they got it completely wrong. Now let me pause the story for a second, because this is where a lot of people mess up, and honestly, where companies like that count on you messing up. According to standard procedure, most folks react emotionally first. They argue, they threaten, they post online, maybe even call a lawyer before they've gathered anything solid. And that's exactly how you lose leverage before you even realize you had it. From a legal perspective, what happened here falls under what's called timber trespass, and this isn't some minor property dispute. In a lot of states, especially rural ones where timber has real market value, the law doesn't just compensate you for what was taken, it multiplies the damages if the act was negligent or intentional. And that multiplier exists for one reason: to punish people who think cutting first and apologizing later is cheaper. But here's the part most people don't see coming. This is a psychological trap. When someone dismisses your loss, laughs it off, or downplays it with something like "it'll grow back," they're not just being arrogant. They're testing whether you understand the value of what you lost, and more importantly, whether you're willing to defend it properly. If you react with anger instead of precision, you confirm their assumption that you're not a real threat. So instead of arguing, I documented. Instead of escalating emotionally, I escalated strategically, because in situations like this, the person who controls the narrative with evidence controls the outcome. So yeah, they laughed, and I let them, because sometimes the fastest way to win is to let the other side underestimate you just long enough to walk themselves into a wall they didn't see coming. I didn't reply to their jokes, didn't fire off angry emails, didn't go back to that trailer to argue with a guy who thought, in the way, was a valid business policy. I just filed the claim. And not some vague complaint either. I filed it clean, structured, backed with everything I had documented, every photo, every coordinate, every valuation line item. And when I hit submit, I already knew this wasn't going to stay funny for long. Because here's the thing, when paperwork replaces conversation, the tone changes. About a week later, I get a call, not from the foreman, not from the guy with his boots on the table. No, this was someone careful, measured, the kind of voice that chooses every word like it costs money. Legal team. And just like that, the energy shifted. No more jokes. No more trees grow back. Now it's, we'd like to discuss this matter. Now it's, perhaps we can reach a reasonable resolution. Reasonable. Funny how that word shows up only after consequences do. We set a meeting. Neutral location, long table, stacks of paper, the kind of room where everything echoes just enough to make silence uncomfortable. I walked in with my folder, nothing flashy, just organized, precise, and I could tell right away they'd done their homework, because the way they looked at me wasn't dismissive anymore, it was calculating. They started talking first, explaining how it was a misunderstanding, how the crew misread the boundary, how these things happen in large-scale operations, and I just listened, nodded here and there. Let them build their version of the story, because sometimes people will talk themselves into a corner if you give them enough space. Then they slid their offer across the table. It wasn't small, I'll give them that. It was what most people would call fair, enough to make the problem go away quietly, enough that if you didn't know better, you'd think, yeah, maybe that's good enough. I didn't even look at it for long. I just took my original invoice and slid it right back across to them. No speech, no build-up, just one sentence. Triple damages, or we let the court decide. And you could feel the air change. Because now this wasn't negotiation anymore, this was math. See, they already knew the law, they knew what timber trespass meant. They knew that once intent or negligence is established, the multiplier kicks in, and suddenly that fair offer they made starts looking like a discount they hoped I'd accept before I realized the actual number. One of them leaned back, fingers pressed together, trying to keep that calm professional face, but you could see it, the calculation happening in real time, weighing the cost of settlement versus the risk of going to court, factoring in my evidence, the clear boundary markers, the drone footage, the documentation that didn't leave much room for interpretation. Because this wasn't a gray area, this was a straight line, literally and legally. They pushed back, of course they did, said triple damages were excessive, said courts don't always award the maximum, said litigation would drag things out, cost time, cost money, and I just let them finish, then repeated the same line, calm as ever. Then we can let the court decide. No emotion, no anger, just certainty. And that's the part that shifts power in a room like that. Not volume, not threats, certainty. We went back and forth for a bit, numbers moving slightly, language getting softer, but I didn't move on the one thing that mattered. Because once you understand where your leverage actually is, you don't trade it away just to feel like you've resolved something faster. Eventually, they asked for time. Said they needed to review internally, run the numbers, talk it through. I said sure, stood up, shook hands, and walked out the same way I walked into that trailer the first time, calm, controlled, already knowing how this was going to end. 2 weeks passed. No calls, no emails, just silence, the kind that tells you decisions are being made behind closed doors. Then one morning, I get the notification. Payment processed. Not partial, not negotiated down to something symbolic, the full amount. Every dollar. Triple damages included. And here's the part people don't talk about. It wasn't just about the money. Yeah, the number was significant, no denying that. But what they really paid for was the assumption they made at the beginning, that they could cross a line, take something that wasn't theirs, brush it off, and move on without consequence. That's what the invoice really corrected. I took a portion of that money and started replanting the section they cleared, not because it'll fix things overnight. It won't. Those original trees took decades, some of them longer than I've even owned the land, but because land works on a different timeline than people do. It doesn't rush, it doesn't panic, it just grows, slowly, consistently, if you give it the chance. And every time I walk that boundary now, I still see the gap where those trees used to stand. You can't unsee something like that. But I also see the markers, the line that didn't move, the line that held, and I know something else now that I didn't have to prove before. Some people think cutting corners saves money, until they find out every tree has a price. So what's the takeaway here? Because if this was just about me getting paid, then honestly it's just another revenge story, and there are plenty of those floating around already. But that's not really what stuck with me after all of this settled down. It's not the check. It's not even the legal win. It's the pattern behind it. The lesson here is people will test your boundaries long before they respect them. Not always in big dramatic ways like this. Sometimes it's subtle, a neighbor borrowing space, a contractor cutting corners, an HOA sending you notices that feel a little off, a little too confident, like they expect you to comply without asking questions. And most of the time, they're right, because most people don't push back, not properly anyway. According to standard procedure, the moment something feels wrong, you pause and verify before you react. That instinct you get, that quiet, something's off, feeling, that's not paranoia, that's pattern recognition, and ignoring it is usually more expensive than dealing with it early. I didn't go storming into that trailer because I was angry. I went because I needed confirmation, and when I got it, I didn't escalate emotionally. I escalated strategically. From a legal perspective, ownership isn't just about having your name on a document. It's about your willingness to enforce it. Laws like timber trespass, property boundaries, even HOA regulations, they don't protect you automatically. They only work if you activate them. And that means documentation, clarity, and patience. A lot of people assume being right is enough. It's not. Being able to prove you're right, that's what actually matters. And let's talk about the psychological side for a second, because this is where most people lose before anything even begins. This is a psychological trap. When someone dismisses your concern, minimizes your loss, or laughs like it's no big deal, they're not just reacting, they're setting the tone. They're trying to frame you as unreasonable so they can stay comfortable being wrong. If you match that energy with anger, you step right into it. You become the emotional one. And suddenly the focus shifts away from what they did to how you reacted. What flips that dynamic is control. Quiet, boring, undeniable control. Documentation instead of accusation, numbers instead of noise, patience instead of pressure. It's not flashy. It doesn't feel satisfying in the moment, but it builds something far more valuable, leverage. And here's the part that might not sound as satisfying, but it's real. Not every situation ends with a full payment and a clean resolution. Sometimes you go to court, sometimes it drags on, sometimes you settle for less than you think is fair, and sometimes, yeah, you lose. But even then, how you handle it determines whether you walk away with nothing or with a lesson that prevents the next loss from happening at all. For me, the money helped replant what was taken, but the real value was in reinforcing that line, not just physically with markers, but mentally. I know exactly where it is, I know exactly how to defend it, and more importantly, I know I will. That changes how people deal with you going forward, whether it's a logging company, a contractor, or even an HOA board that's used to pushing rules just a little further than they should. Because once you demonstrate that you understand both the rules and the consequences, people think twice. So if you're watching this and thinking, yeah, but I wouldn't know where to start simple. Know your boundaries, literally and legally. Keep records, even when nothing's wrong. Take photos, keep contracts, save emails, not because you expect to fight, but because if one shows up, you're already prepared. And if something does happen, don't rush to react, slow down, gather, document, understand your position before you make your move. That pause, that moment where you choose strategy over emotion, that's where outcomes start to change. I'm curious though, what would you have done in that situation? Would you have taken the first offer and moved on, or push for the full amount knowing it might escalate? Drop it in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think, and honestly, half the time the best insights come from people who've been through something similar. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about trees. It's about knowing where your line is and making sure people understand it's not going anywhere.